A pleasure to be with all of you this morning. So I'm going to just share a few things about the variety selection. So I'm just going to put the screen up. We should be ready to go. When we are thinking about canola, of course, there are, like many crops, winter types and springtime. So today's focus will be on the spring canola type. There is some work done in the southern part of the United States on developing winter canolas, and even in some of the other states. So in the future, there might be some good winter canola types, but for now, we're concentrating on the spring types. Just to kind of get everybody to understand the differences between winter and spring types, a winter type always needs some vernalization, meaning some cold temperatures. And here's a nice picture in the center of winter canola that was planted in the spring. And on the right side, you see some spring canola also planted in the spring. And you see that there's only a few heads coming out on the winter canola because it didn't get the winter coolness. So as I'm saying, we are talking mostly today about the canola is a spring type for our presentations today. So I'm going to talk a little bit about hybrids, but we need to realize that, the way you are dealing with a hybrid will also then give the performance of the hybrid. So when I'm thinking about canola, I think we are going to discuss today about the early planting opportunity, because canola is a cool season crop. So it is better when it starts flowering in the cool period of time. So I am presenting here a little bit of data from the National Agricultural Service. And what this is, the years from 1990 to 2020. And on the left, you see the pounds per acre. And each dot is the representation of the average canola yield as reported by the Statistical Service. So you can see that the yields vary from year to year, but there's a nice trend line. And if you look here at the formula, you can see that there is this Y, and then there is an X, and there's a 20.45, which means on a yearly basis, we have seen that the yields have been increasing around that 20.5 pounds per acre. Now that is partly due to management, and we're going to talk about that, and as well door genetic selection of varieties where we haven't seen an increase. So we cannot quite distinguish if it was the genetics or the management. Those are the topics we're going to address today. Canola acres are quite substantial in the state. It is a major crop. On the left, we see the acres. We are kind of plateauing the last year about 1.6 million acres. So great crop. It varies a little bit year by year, and the coming year, we are hoping that we see a good number of acres again. As we're talking about herbicide, we do know that there are several types of herbicide tolerance. We have the Clearfield, the Roundup, the Liberty. We have non-transgenic, the SUs, and we have, of course, the conventionals. And so there are many opportunities to select a hybrid based on this. We also have at NDSU a breeding program that has been in existence for some time now. And this is some data that is provided by the breeder. And on the top line, on the green line, you'll see the line that he has been testing for a number of years in various locations in 2019 and 20. And if you look at the box where I have a red box, you'll see that the average yield of all those 8 environments was 1,900 pounds. Comparing that with a number of hybrids was 1,800 pounds. So this particular open pollinating variety has been doing very well, and it is slated to be released if there is a commercial company that will work with this hybrid. So there is a breeding program at NDSU. The other thing that we have been doing for many years is reporting variety results. And the easiest way to find that result is to just Google NDSU variety trials, and then you will get to a page with all the information, and you can then find one of the main crops, canola. And on this slide, you can see we have from each individual site the results, but also we have the results compiled in a PDF booklet that can be accessed by clicking on the link there, and we will get then the PDF with all the trials that were conducted at NDSU over the previous year. Now, when we are thinking about varieties and hybrids, we also have to look at the geographical area where they were tested. So we have on this map, Langdon, Carrington, Minot, Williston, and Hettinger, different locations. And of course, Langdon is one of the main production areas. So when you are selecting a hybrid, it is good to look at the hybrid where it is tested closest to your location. But for stability, you can also look at some of the other data, which gives you some information of stability of performance. In the booklet, I'm just going to give you just a few examples of what type of information there is. So in the Liberty Link and other canola hybrids, we have a table which will indicate the type. But very important for selection is to know some of the resistance. And we're going to talk today also about diseases. Blackleg is an important disease, and some varieties have resistance. Clubroot is becoming more of an issue in North Dakota, and some of the hybrids have resistance, some don't. If you do not have a clubroot issue, you might be able to get by with a variety that doesn't have the resistance. The next part in this particular graph is comparing across different locations. So this one is the means are expressed as a percent. On the bottom, you see the trial mean. So the number percent there is reflected of the trial mean at the location. The reason why we do that is to kind of see how a variety or a hybrid does across locations. So that is a quick way of seeing the stability of hybrids across locations. Now I'm going to kind of look at a few data points here for canola here at Langdon. And this table is just kind of a snapshot of a lot of information that is in the table, just kind of as an example. So we have in the table the days to flower, and I will expand on this topic a little bit more, but that is from planting to flowering. And the next column is how long does it flower? And the total time that the plant is in the field is indicated in the days to maturity, days after planting. So we can see that there are a few that are earlier maturing, 84 days, and the latest is 93 days. Now that is important to know depending on when you can plant. If you can plant early, you benefit from for a hybrid that has a longer growing season so that you can maximize the yield. Plant height is important because we are concerned about lodging. If a plant is too tall, there is a higher chance for lodging. However, it is not always straightly correlated. As you can see here, the plant height and the lodging scores are not exactly correlated. So there is also the strength of the stock involved in this particular lodging score. We are talking about a hybrid basically for oil production. And therefore, we always give the oil percent. Now, what is important to realize is that the oil should be compared within a trial. So I'm very confident that the numbers within the trial reflect the hybrid differences. But you cannot compare the oil that was produced in Hettinger with the oil that was produced in Langdon for two different hybrids, because that is not how the test is set up. So it is really set up to compare oil within a location. And of course, the last column is the most important for many of you, that is the yield. So here I've done the same with the table, but now I am putting all the hybrids on the X and the pounds per acre on the Y, and you can see that there is variability in yield. So if you look here to the right, the highest yielding is slightly over the 3,500 pounds. On the left, you see a few that have a little lower yield. So when we are looking at yield selection, yield is a component, but we do need to consider also the varieties with resistance to the various diseases. This one is the Liberty Link Clearfield. It's kind of the same setup, all the varieties in Langdon. And then you can see there is quite a big difference between the highest on the right and the lower group on the left. Now, I talked a little bit about crop height. And so this one is looking at data from 2020 in Langdon. The crop height is expressed in inches of the whole trial. So I showed you a table with only 4, but this was the whole trial. And then on the left, you see the pounds per acre. And you see there is a little bit of a tendency that if the plants get taller, that in that particular trial, we saw that the yields were a little lower. So there is this relationship between crop height and potential yield expression. Now, as I mentioned, critical is the planting date. So if we are looking at the nice picture that was provided by Dr. Johnson, this is what we call a planting date trial. So on the foreground, you see late planted, and in the background, you see some that were planted early. So I'm going to kind of walk you through to some of the examples, and especially talking about the importance of the plant development. So here we see several of our locations, Carrington, Hettinger, and Langdon. And then we see the yield expressed in pounds per acre. The early planting date is number 1, and then the last date is number 5. And if you're looking just at Carrington, I'm going to also express the yields based on the highest yield being 100%. The date 1 had 100%, was 2,500 plus pounds. But if you go to day 5, you can see that it is nearly half, only half of the yield. Now, if you want to know the exact date, in the coming slide, I will give you the exact dates. So in Hettinger, the trend is the same. A little bit different is Langdon, and my colleagues will talk about that a little bit later. But the point here is that if we are looking at hybrid selection, the hybrid will only shine if you really give it the benefit of early planting and proper management. Now, this table is kind of explaining a little bit about what is driving the plant development. And if we look here, seeding date was April, and the first flower in the column was after 50 days. So it took a long time because it was nice and cool. The plant had a lot of time to develop the leaves and start bolting. And as we can see, from beginning to end flower was 23 days. And then it took an additional 22 days to mature for a total of 95 days. However, if you push the planting date back into the season where it is warmer, everything goes faster. The development goes a lot faster. The flowering is shorter. The maturity, from flowering to maturity is shorter. So the plant is only in the field 70 days. So if you look at this data, what I did now is to put the days in the field on the bottom, and we put the relative yield on the left. And if you look here at the formula, that means that every day that the plant was longer in the field, it had about 2% higher yield. So it is critical when we are thinking about hybrids. You want to maximize the yields, that it is critical to have the planting date early. So we're talking about a crop that is harvested for oil. So the second thing that happens when you plant late is the oil content. So when we are looking at oil, date 1 is higher, 44% plus. And when we get to day 5 in June, it is lower. So there are 2 factors. You have lower yield with late planting, and we have lower oil content. And that is regardless of the inherent characteristic of the hybrid. There is difference between hybrids, but planting is very important for getting the highest yields. So kind of wrapping it up here. So first of all, we need to look at yield and yield stabilities. The way to do that is to look at data from this past year and the previous years. We have that data also still on the web. You can look at that one. And then if we are looking at maturity, as I mentioned, we have variability in maturity. And if we can plant early and we can maximize the number of interception of the radiation, we may have a little bit of a higher yield. But with late planting, late maturing may have a negative effect. Plant height and lodging are bothly correlated. So it is important that we select a variety and hybrid that has good standability and can then realize that yield. Disease tolerance, We need to have varieties, hybrids that are resistant to blackleg, and as we are looking in the future also to clubroot. And then there is a difference between seedling vigor and hybrids with good vigor are more competitive. So I've come to my 15-minute time frame here. We have a little bit of time for some questions and answers. So if there's anybody who has a question, you can put the question in the chat box, and Craig will monitor the questions.